Hello, everyone. We are very happy to be here with Professor Olle Johansson and also with Professor Álvaro de Sales and Dr. Silvia to talk about electromagnetic fields. So, good afternoon or good night, Professor Johansson. Good
Thank you.
afternoon, Álvaro and Silvia. And Professor Johansson is considered one of the world's leading authorities in terms of knowledge of the health effects of electromagnetic fields. He began researching it over 30 years ago, and he has since published hundreds of scientific articles. He also has been nominated a few times for the Nobel Prize. So thank you very much for being here with us, talking with this very important subject. Also, thank you, Silvia and Álvaro. So welcome, Professor Johansson.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit how your work started, how you started researching this subject, and why you think is the importance for our daily life in the world.
Okay. I started in 1973 at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden. And together with a supervisor, Professor Thomas Höckfeldt, and we investigated at that time the central and peripheral nervous system and its content of various neurotransmitters, modulators, and so on. And we happened, or rather my supervisor was extremely successful. And this is very important because we built scientific level of knowledge and interaction with other scientists that proved very useful later on when I entered this field of adverse health and biological effects of artificial electromagnetic fields, like from cell phones, baby alarms, Wi-Fi routers, and so on. And I had my dissertation at the Karolinska Institute. And, you know, when you have had your dissertation presented, it is customary that you choose another field thereafter, not to compete with your previous supervisor. And I thought that, maybe I could choose to work with humans as experimental animals, because I had practically only worked with rats, mice, guinea pigs, that kind of material. So I took humans, and then automatically you became very limited, because when you asked normal healthy volunteers for a piece of their skin, they would say yes. You can get a piece of the oral mucosa, and from women, a piece of the vaginal mucosa. But if you would have asked people for a piece of their brain or heart, they would, of course, have said, no way, I will not give away that, you know. So we became very limited in a sense, and we focused mostly on these three different tissue types and primarily on the human skin. And we started to look at normal healthy skin. We looked at skin from different skin diseases, etc. And all of this, and this is really kind of odd in a sense, you know, it prepared me for a special evening at 8 o'clock when I was about to leave the laboratory and go home. Someone had left a radio on, and I never listened to radio. So I went to turn it off, and while my hand moved closer to the radio to switch it off, I heard a woman, Kajsa Wedin, from the west coast of Sweden, a town which is called Göteborg. She was talking about some strange new type of persons that got skin irritations, rashes, palpitating pains, and so on, when they sat in front of the newly introduced personal computers. And she was asking for some expertise help in the field of clinical neurology. And I'm not a clinical neurologist, but I'm a neuroscientist. I thought, close enough. So I called her the day after, and we arranged a meeting together with a physicist from the Chalmers University in Göteborg. And all of this is the reason why we talk now. Had I turned off the radio, then I would have gone in some other direction in my scientific life. But she introduced me to the idea of persons being electro-hypersensitive. And at that time, we sort of invented a term. We called it screen dermatitis. It was caused by computer screens, television screens. And, you know, now we are talking around 1981, 82 somewhere. So this is before all types of wireless gadgets we have today, cell phones, tablets, and so on. And we were not even aware of that they were around the corner. And no low energy light bulbs, etc., you know. But we started to look at the skin, and very quickly we found changes in the skin of these people that actually could explain why they had these sensations. And we formed a working hypothesis, namely that the electro-hypersensitive persons, they had just a classical radiation damage. They had not been damaged by radioactive nuclides like plutonium or uranium, nothing like that, not from X-rays, not from strong ultraviolet light, not from radar beams. They had just been harmed by the electromagnetic signals coming from the computer screens and the televisions. And again, you know, we could very quickly then demonstrate changes at the cellular and molecular level, and changes that initially was welcomed by my peers. But somewhere around the beginning of the 1990s, something happened, because then we had seen for some years the introduction of wireless technologies, primarily cell phones, and we had began to show that such cell phones, and we were actually the first to demonstrate that people could be sensitive to the presence of a hidden cell phone. And when we did that and presented the data, then something happened. The money disappeared, and a lot of very, very tough hardship appeared instead. We had evidently touched a very, very sensitive nerve in society. And from that on, it became harder and harder to pursue the type of necessary investigations that people were asking for. And I'm sorry to say, 2021, that the situation is unfortunately as bad as then. I mean, we do have a lot of new data, but the leading authorities in the world, they do not want to, or they cannot, or I don't know, they don't want to pay any attention. And that's stressful because as a scientist, you are kind of a mental fire brigade soldier. And when you see the smoke at the horizon, you want to investigate. What kind of smoke is it? Is it a fire? Should we put it out or not? And you're hampered by the fact that you just cannot do practically anything. And I have written to many authorities, different levels of our societies, including the Swedish government and parliament, and pleaded them, and I asked them, please send all the scientific documentation showing that I am wrong. I want to be wrong, as the fire soldier wants to be wrong, you know. A false alarm is much nicer than an active alarm. And so far, they have never sent a single comma, period, or anything, not a single word. So I'm still waiting for it to be proven wrong. And in the meantime, as you know, our societies have been drenched in especially microwave-based technologies from the beginning, 1G, 2G, 3G, and now 4, 5, and 6G. And I even seen discussions about 7G. So it's very rapidly being rolled out, newer and newer versions, newer and newer technologies, and without any form of pre-marketing testing or any due diligence or anything like that. And that's scary. And I hope that people in power know what they're doing, but I'm still curious why they cannot send their documentation showing me to be wrong.
That's very interesting, your metaphor with the fire, that a fireman wants to be wrong, wants to be a false alarm. That's it was very interesting. So do you think it's not a matter of have enough evidence anymore? So do you think we need more scientific articles, more proving, or do you think the problem is in another area?
It's always tempting as a scientist to say, yes, 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 I want to do more. I want to investigate more details and so on, because that's really the driving force for any scientist. But from a society point of view, we don't need more evidence. There are so very, very, very many papers already published. And if you go to other areas of our society, people have decided to bail out and protect themselves for much more than 20 years ago. And I could just quickly mention, for instance, of course, the manufacturers who do not in any form take responsibility of any harmful effects of their gadgets. The operators not doing this, they say, no way, we cannot take any form of responsibility for this. And of course, there is not a single insurance or reinsurance company in the world that protects you. And I remember I was at a meeting in London in 2002, and at this meeting were representatives from, for instance, Lloyd's UK, which is the largest insurance dealer in the world, Swiss Re, which is the largest reinsurance company in the world, and a number of other insurance companies. And they all said to us that for them, it was not the question whether these microwaves and gadgets were dangerous or not. They knew they were dangerous. The question was instead, who is going to pay for the health coverage demands in the future? And they said they don't want to do that. And therefore, they had abandoned the ship. And this was here in Sweden covered in extenso by the media. Every newspaper, tabloid, radio, television had a number of articles and programs about this. But people, the ordinary consumers and citizens, they are so occupied with taking selfies and updating their Facebook profile and liking their breakfast or other breakfasts and so on. So they didn't pay any attention. No one stood up and said, hey, what's this? Do you mean that my life and insurance doesn't cover for this? And the answer is no. There is no coverage, no protection, no form of responsibility or liability in this. And therefore, they didn't wait for any more research. For them, it was enough more than 20 years ago. And that is very, very telling.
Do you think before the insurance company starts to covering this kind of injuries, we need more the doctors and the medicine to do the cause-effect relation between a symptom of a patient and the wireless sources? Or
no, wait. The insurance and reinsurance companies, they will never cover this. They will never swim back and climb aboard the ship again.
Even if the doctors and the medicine establish a cause-effect relation?
That would be dramatically expensive for the insurance industry. Then everyone is entitled to a compensation. So no.
Yes.
And therefore, I mean, you hit a very important button here. There is a movement in the world and there is not very many, but some medical doctors, they want to medicalize and psychiatricalize persons with electron hypersensitivity. And that would, of course, be dramatically wrong, because then they would never, ever get any form of compensation, because then it would only be in their head and or their body, not in the gadget itself. And therefore, I'm fighting a very tough fight to not allow these doctors to enter the field in that way. Here in Sweden, as you probably know, and now it's coming in a few other countries as well, electron hypersensitivity is a fully recognized functional disability. So it's not inside the electron hypersensitive person, it's in the environment, the toxic environment, the electromagnetic fields. They are the ones causing the health problems.
Yes. And instead of the insurance company, what if the consumer or the citizen prosecute or sue the company or the government for a tumor, a cancer?
Yeah,
It will be possible, and I think in some parts of the world this is happening. I heard some prosecutions or some people, citizens suing. I don't know if the telecom company or the government about like tobacco happens with tobacco.
Yeah,
Some
again,
decades ago.
a very important button here, you know. And from the beginning, the lawyers, they were aiming for the manufacturers and the operators to try to get some form of compensation. But then they realized, the lawyers, they realized that the companies had protected themselves in such a way so it was just not possible to sue them. They had bailed out in a formal legal way, and therefore they changed the target or the aim to the governments and parliaments. As you probably know, in Italy, for instance, there are 6 tumor cases, brain tumor cases, that have gone through all the legal levels, including the Supreme High Court, and where it was ruled in favor of the patient that yes, the cell phone had caused it. But the compensation comes from the government, the parliament, from the state level. And this is ironic because in every country, the state and the municipality and the county councils are paid for by the citizens. So actually, the brain tumor patients in Italy, they pay themselves the compensation. The companies have already gone away. They don't pay anything, you know. So here the world needs to think a little bit. And just a quick sidetrack, you have probably read about the current vaccine industry, which has been preempted from any form of responsibility of the current corona vaccines. So if there will be any economical demands in the future from damaged patients or citizens, they will have to pay it themselves.
Yes, I see many relations with what was tobacco like 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, that people start to suing the tobacco companies, and in the beginning they didn't have any compensation, but at certain point they start to receive a lot of money.
Yeah,
a lot of money, and
yeah,
then it when the companies start to become afraid. And I think this is the most powerful, the most promising, it seems to me, one of the most promising ways, because we are talking about money. And when the companies will have to pay for these people that have tumors or have cancer, that's when the game will start to change. That's what I think. What do you think about that?
Well, I don't agree, because the tobacco scandal taught all industrial sectors how to protect themselves. So from a legal point of view, it's impossible, more or less, to win such a case today. And therefore, as I said, lawyers around the world, they aim instead for the governments and parliaments, for the state, because a state can never go bankrupt, whereas a company can go bankrupt overnight and just disappear. So there's just no way to get to them, you know. And so they're aiming for a new target, and maybe that's a very wise way to go. And of course, for the person being harmed, they don't care where the money is coming from, but it is in a way cynical that a brain tumor patient will have to pay a certain part of his own compensation from his own tax payment, instead of getting the compensation from the company that produced and manufactured and sold the gadget that had harmed the person.
Yeah, but this happens in Italy, you said, right?
Yeah, but there are now processes going on in other countries. And as always, especially interesting is the United States, because the demands there are big, to say the least, you know. They are looking for enormous compensations. In Italy, as in Sweden, I guess a brain tumor patient would get like, I don't know, $5,000 and a pat on the shoulder. But in United States, we talk about astronomical sums in compensation.
Yeah, I see that you are saying that usually the compensations are being paid by the government, that in the bottom line is the money of the citizen themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
But do you think it's impossible to the money come from the companies?
As it is now, I would say from a practical point of view, it will be just too expensive and too insecure to even try. And you know, one of my most common call would be from a lawyer, a barrister, a judge, something like that. And I understand that their sort of summary of the situation is, no, it's easier to go for the state.
I would like to ask you some questions now, more related to your scientific work. That is amazing, by the way.
Thank you.
Your work concerning the broadcasting FM antennas and the cases of asthma and melanoma. Could you talk a little bit about this to us, please? And how it's going, if this research is following along or not?
You know, I could start with the last part, you know. Most of our research efforts are just standing still. And the reason for that is lack of money. We are trying to engage people all over the world, but the trickle of money is too small. It doesn't really help at the end of the day. So if anyone listening or looking at this program has money in the drawer back home, please send it, because we need it, you know. And so that's very difficult. And people are smart, you know. People are very, very intelligent, and very many persons, they write to me and suggests different projects, experiments, investigations. And in nearly 100% of the cases, we already have these projects somewhere on a shelf, waiting for money to be able to start to investigate this. And that goes also for the very interesting investigations regarding frequency modulated radio waves. And I will make a very long story short. Myself, lecturing to medical students, dental students, and so on, I have many times told them that the reason you see such a dramatic increase in the incidence of malignant melanomas in the skin here in Sweden is because people have exposed themselves too much to the sun. And among the culprits was the fact that in the 50s and 60s, Swedes got more money. The world opened up after the Second World War, and they went to places like Mallorca and the Canary Islands in Spain, and they were on the beach for a week or two and sunburned themselves too much. And when they got home, 20 years later on, they had a malignant melanoma that would be discovered at the routine control at the clinical entity. And then I started with a collaborator, Örjan Hallberg, who unfortunately died a few years ago. And I had been taught at the Karolinska Institute that before doing anything, you should always plot the data, meaning you should make a curve to look at the different years, what happened actually. So I said, let's plot the data from Sweden and going backwards in time and see when does this association start and how does it look. And now the odd thing happened, and I'm not saying that the sun doesn't have a very, very important role, but the funny thing was that in pure English, if you looked at the Swedes at the time, what happened was that first, when you made a time scale, first they died, then they got malignant melanomas, and then they went to the Canary Islands for holiday. It was completely the other way around. And then we said, what? And I remember I told my collaborator, no, you must have done something wrong. This is not possible. Please, we have to do it again. But the result was exactly the same. First you die, then you get malignant melanoma, and then you decide to have a summer vacation in Spain. And then we started to think, because in Sweden there was a very sharp time point, and it could be broken down to different parts of Sweden. We looked in Norway, Denmark, we looked in the Baltic states, we looked in United States, in England, and so on. And there were different time points where people suddenly started to die in malignant melanomas, and shortly thereafter, you saw a quick, rapid increase in the number of new malignant melanoma cases. And when you see such an effect, then it's always tempting to look for some kind of environmental factor. Something had in Sweden happened around 1955. And you can break it down, as I said, to different parts, down to practically on the day something happened. And we started to scratch our head, and we looked for different environmental factors. And among those, we tested for FM radio, frequency modulated radio, which is fantastic. All the fun programs in Sweden, there are still most of them sent by FM radio. And I've listened many times to such radio programs, including the one I mentioned before with Kajsa Wedin and electron hypersensitivity. So it has done a very good job. But it turned out, that you had an exact association. And the reason could be because frequency modulated radio waves in Sweden, they are body resonant. The wavelength is exactly the same as the height of a human being taller than 120 centimeters, 1.2 meters. And we could then look into different countries, and wherever we looked, it was 100% association. And of course, 1955, people in Sweden turned on FM radio, and immediately everyone was exposed, not only the antennas on your kitchen radio, but also yourself. And everyone that is a little bit older, like myself, we have had problems in reception of the radio programs, and therefore we took our hand and hold in the antenna on the kitchen radio and manipulated it a little bit to get the better program quality. And of course, we then acted as perfect antennas. So the quality was immediately increased. No one thought about that we were receiving huge amounts of energy. And, from a layman's point of view, it's tempting to think that if you feed cells with energy, they will do things. They will feel better or worse. They will produce things, or maybe start dividing in an uncontrolled fashion, what we call cancer, and one of them is malignant melanomas. And in Sweden, the most rapidly increasing type of cancer is still malignant melanomas of the skin. The incidence increase is in the order of 5-6% per year, which is a colossal increase, actually. And I say again, of course, the sun is very important, but as you realize from my story, it's just not possible that a person could first die, then get a disease, and then travel to Spain. So maybe this environmental exposure has also done something bad to living cells. We have written quite a number of papers about this, and we would love to continue this research, but without money, no such projects right now.
Very interesting, your story. And what about the other kinds of cancers that could be related to FM broadcasting, or would it be just the melanoma? What do you think about other kinds of cancer?
Well, we have looked and saw associations, not such tight associations, so we didn't dare to really draw any far-reaching conclusions. And also you mentioned a disease like asthma could also maybe be influenced by this. And perhaps we need to change the exposure parameters, for instance, increasing the wavelengths. You can have classical amplitude modulated radio with wavelengths around 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 meters or longer. But of course, then you have to be cautious so that you don't suddenly harm, for instance, giraffes in Africa, because they are tall, you know, and maybe they would be in resonance with a longer wavelengths. So one has to be careful here, or make it in some other way. And as you know, today one has gone in the other direction, much smaller wavelengths, and digitalized the whole radio spectrum more or less. And then you have an impact not on the body, but on organs, tissues, cells, and finally molecules. And that is debate very much around so-called millimeter waves that are used for future 5G, the fifth generation mobile telephony, because they will be so very short. So they will be able to interact both at the tissue, cellular, and molecular level.
Yes, and could you explain a little bit about how these frequencies affects our skin? What happens to our skin, for example, when we have the melanoma? How do the EMF interfere with our skin?
Well,
on a cellular level?
Yeah, I have to be honest and say, I don't know. And that's exactly one of the projects we would love to pursue, because it's such an important point you bring up. How does this interaction happen? What are the molecular events, the cellular events? And today we don't know. There are ideas, hypotheses, theories, and so on, but no firm knowledge. And it would be lovely to have that firm knowledge, because then you would also know what is the factor in the exposure you need to change. Maybe it's not that much. Maybe it's a slight change which has to be made. And today we don't have that knowledge. You also asked about other cancer forms, and that's also very important to cover. As you know, if we leave the conventional kitchen radio and go to cell phones, many people talk about cell phones in association with brain tumors. And the World Health Organization in Geneva has also cancer classified such radio frequent fields already in 2011 as a possible source for such cancers. But at the same time, it has to be said that when you look in the societies, in the countries all over the world, you do not see any dramatic increases in incidence. Like in Sweden, actually, you have a slight decrease in incidence of that very type of, and I thank God, they are very rare also, type of brain tumors. So no, you don't see any dramatic shifts. But that's for now. That's 2021. Maybe if you call me in 50 years' time again, maybe the situations will be different, and that we don't know yet.
I think Professor Alvaro have a question.
Ole, going to shorter wavelength and higher frequencies, it's known that their absorption will be less deep than the lower frequencies, and therefore most of the energy could be absorbed in the skin and other epithelial cells, as well as the eyes for the person. Since these new technologies, 5G and 6G, will need towers very close one to the other, say perhaps in each corner in a city, do you believe that these problems in the skin, such as cancer and melanoma and other skin problems, could have a high increase in the next few years due to the use of these new technologies with the towers very close one to the other?
That's a very, very good and very interesting question. And yes, that's a possibility. And as you know, the rollout of 5G, which is going on right now, has not reached very far yet. So we don't have any population data really. And the few places in Sweden that has been serviced with 5G mobile telephony, people do not report any extra problems in any way, neither with the eyes or with the skin. And also technically, I think it's important, and you are 100% right, no question about it. You will have a higher absorption in your skin and your superficial parts of the body. But at the same time, the energy levels are such so no human being will shield the communication. It will go right through you, because otherwise the telecom companies would sell a product which cannot be practically used. The moment you have your cell phone to your head, you would shield it. And of course, that will not happen. So they have already thought about the penetration capacity, and also, you know, the very important penetration capacity through ground down to basement, cellars, underground facilities. And with the 5G systems, as you say, they need to put up base stations very close. In Sweden, they talk about a distance of, depending on sort of the indoor or outdoor geography, from 50 meters to 200 meters. With 3G, you can have like 10 kilometers distance between base stations in open air. But with the 5G and 6G, you would need a lot more. And that is, of course, a wet dream for any base station antenna producer. They will become very, very wealthy. But from a landscape architectonical point of view, it will destroy the field of vision. And when you ask people here in Sweden if they want to have these boxes everywhere, you know, they say, no, thank you. But they will have it. And I think we need to have a discussion. Is society and how it looks and functions, is that decided by the citizens or by the industry? And I think it's time for the citizens to stand up and say no or yes, depending on what they want to have. And also for 5G, it has been said, and when you look technically at it, that's highly likely that the exposure levels will actually be lower than compared to 4G, but they will be very technically different. So in 5G, there could be so-called hotspots that might, as you said, burn the skin, burn plants, burn bacteria, burn anything, you know. And I hope that someone in the world is allowed to investigate this before it is too late, you know.
Of course, Professor Olle Johansson. I would like to ask you another question. Is your colleague, Professor Leonard Hartel, from the Orebo Hospital, has made many papers showing the increase of different brain tumors. And that was a very important work. But however, recently, a few months ago, WHO mentioned that if the work from Professor Hartel were correct, if the work from Professor Hartel were correct, we would see a high increase of brain tumors, such as gliomas, all over the world. In Brazil, there is an official agency called the Brazilian Research for Cancer. This is INCA, we call, and they have some statistics, and their statistics of mortality for brain tumors shows a very high increase of brain tumor mortality in Brazil. And if you look at the statistics for different places in Brazil, you will see that the increase will have coincidence with the increase of the use of cell phones on that region. However, these statistics from this agency, this official agency, is not very well spread for the population. And these statistics showing the increase of the cancer contradicts what the WHO mentioned a few months ago, that there were not an increase in brain tumors. And also, you had some results from other countries, such as in England, the work from Dr. Alice Day Phillips, I believe, show increase of brain tumors. And I would like to link this as well to the work done in France by the Phonegate organization, Dr. Mark Arazi, where they they measured around 500 different cell phones and found that their exposure levels were well above the international recommendations, such as ICNIRP and the FCC from USA. And this is very serious because these recommendations are only based on thermal effects. So if the cell phones produce an SAR above the exposure limits for the thermal effects, this should be really a very red light, and because many people use cell phones a long time a day and several days a week and several weeks along the year. And they are exposed not only to the thermal effects, but to the non-thermal, long-time effects. So this is really very serious. And I believe that WHO is treating with disdain all the epidemiological results shown by Professor Leonard Hardell. Could you comment on that?
Okay. I could begin with the cancer data, and I'm sorry to say that I'm not aware of the details of the Brazilian ones, but I know, for instance, Alistair Phillips' study in England very well, and he showed that the number of brain tumors had increased, I think, since 1970, from 2 cases per 100,000 inhabitants to 5 cases per 100,000 inhabitants.
Can I interrupt you just a minute? In Brazil, increased from 1 to 3 in 100,000. And perhaps Fabiano can show his slides, which he has shown in the first day of the last meeting. And these slides will show you the dramatic increase in the mortality rate due to brain tumors in Brazil in the recent years. And if you superpose the curves of the increase of use of cell phones, you will see that there is a good matching or coincidence when both are increasing with a bit delay, but there is a good matching. Perhaps, just sorry to interrupt you, this is the curve. In the horizontal axis, you have the years, and in the vertical axis, you have the mortality rate of people for 100,000 persons. And the blue is for the man, and the red is for the woman. And you can see that it's around 1.5 up to the beginning of the installation of mass use of cell phones. And the increase was up to 3 times. This statistics, this statistics is an official statistic from that www.inca.gov.br. But we asked them, do you have any explanation why you have this such an increase of brain tumor mortality? It's not brain tumor incidence, it's brain tumor mortality. And we asked them if they had any explanation for this increase, and they didn't have any answer to this. So we pay for the statistics, but the statistics is not used for any action to try to investigate the reasons for that and to try to reduce this increase. So this statistics for all the country, but if you look for some different places, what we call here states, such as São Paulo is a state, if you look for each state, you will find that there is a coincidence of the increase with the more massive use of the cell phones. And in addition to that, I looked recently for these statistics in that site, and I was unable to find it. I believe that they stopped to make these statistics, and I don't know the reason why they stopped that. Perhaps we can justify this for any reason. But that's what you mentioned in England. Yes, as by Professor Phillips made, but sorry to interrupt you. Please continue what you were mentioning.
Thank you very much to begin with, and very interesting. And as you say, in England, talking about incidence instead, they demonstrated an increase from around 2 to around 5. But this is extremely important. If we go back, for instance, to the Brazilian data or the English data, regardless of incidence or mortality, these brain tumors were extremely rare, and they are still extremely rare. And I think it's very difficult to ask for any government or parliament to take down the telecommunication systems in their country based upon such a non-significant increase. To go from 2 to 5 or 1.5 to 4 per 100,000 is not significant. And therefore, the WHO, they are right. If, for instance, Lennart Hardell's data would be true in the population, already several years ago, the curve would be straight up. It would be an exponential curve going right up as a rocket. And in Sweden, it's instead going slightly down. In most countries, it's stable over time. In a few countries, you see a slight increase, very, very slight. And one has to realize, if I was the Boris Johnson in England and someone told me we have to stop exposing the population because statisticians at our health authorities have shown an increase in incidence or in mortality, that very, very small, I would probably say, no, we cannot do that. And also, since 1970 to today, and I'm talking about England then, of course, the number of confounders are extremely big, and probably what they see, 5 per 100,000, was actually the same in 1970, but they were unable to detect it, and therefore people were given other diagnoses. And, you know, in 1970, medical doctors around the world much more often would say, we don't know why you have this headache, I'm sorry. Today, they would more likely be able to say, well, it could be a brain tumor, and with our new MRIs, PET scans, CT, and so on, we can discover very small tumors and label you differently. But one has to be honest and come back to the very fact. And I know I sound very cynical. I don't mean to be that. But if 4 people, 5 people die per 100,000, well, society has to cope with that. To kill the biggest milk cow ever on the planet, no, they won't do that. We need something much more dramatic. And as you know, there are other areas which are much, much more dramatic. So the cancer card won't function. And finally, also, I want to say that Lennart Hardell has done very elegant jobs, but he has not shown incidence increases. He has looked over time and place for associations between mobile phone usage and tumors. And that's another type of statistics. Well, when I get the question, which I very often get, could you please rank the dangers of artificial electromagnetic fields? I place the cancer card at the bottom. Most often, I don't even take it up because I don't think the WHO is wrong. I think today, 2021, they are right, but it could change in the next 50 years.
Professor Johansson, what did you put in the top of the ranking of the most dramatic evidence?
Well, I'm glad you said that. I would definitely put there several competing of number one, and among those would be the clear genotoxic effects, damage to the DNA, which is very, very scary. And as you know, if we talk about pharmaceuticals, food products, drinks, and so on, if any such product during its invention and production shows genotoxic effects, it's forbidden to be sold to the general population. Because genotoxic effects, if they spread in the population, then we could kill everyone. So people are really concerned about such. Of course, also the impact on certain animals, especially pollinators. There are some very interesting data there. We are trying our hardest to get money to replicate honeybee experiments. So far, we haven't succeeded, but we are trying and trying very hard. And the thing that keeps me maybe most awake in the night, and we talked about the fire brigade and the false alarms. Every evening I go down on my knees and say to God or Allah or whoever it is up there, please make the American scientists wrong that demonstrated in 2017 when they exposed ordinary bacteria we have on us and in us right now when we talk, to exposure from old second generation mobile telephony and modern Wi-Fi routers. They demonstrated that the bacteria became antibiotic resistant. The very same year, 2017, the G20 countries had a special meeting in Europe only about the fact that every year at that time, around 25,000 Europeans die prematurely because of antibiotic resistance in healthcare. And at the meeting, it was calculated that 2050, all around the world, more than 10 million people would die every year because of resistant bacteria in healthcare. And the G20 countries and Tahiri and co-workers in the United States, they didn't know about each other. But if you merge the data of the scientists with the worries of the politicians, the industrialists, the civil servants, then the 10 million could easily become 7.6 billion people dying from antibiotic resistance. When I heard about this, I immediately wrote a number of articles about it, and I also called physicians, and I really put them against the wall here in Sweden and said, hey, what's about this antibiotic resistance? I read it sometimes on flyers for tabloids. I hear a few minutes about it in radio and television, but is it really bad? And all the physicians, especially surgeons, said, bad? Are you joking? It's more than bad. If someone doesn't come up with a new type of antibiotics, soon people here in Sweden and elsewhere will start dying from a splinter in their thumb, as they did at the end of the 1900th century. But the physician said, we are not allowed to talk publicly about this because we cannot scare the general population. But it is a very serious situation. As you know, coming back to the pollinators, the honeybees, we have an extremely serious situation worldwide. I think it was 2017 or 18, it was reported from Germany that more than 75% of the pollinators, they are just gone, and no one knows where they went. When experiments have been done with cell phones near honeybee hives, the queen and the worker bees, they just collect and leave the beehive and they do not return. So if you are a honeybee, then you should definitely not buy, own and use a cell phone. And maybe that's one of the confounders, the culprits that needs to be investigated. And we are, as I said, trying our hardest to do it, but we are mostly rolling our thumbs waiting for some kind of funding.
Professor Olle, can I make you another question? You mentioned about the DNA damage, and in your country we had Professor Leif Salford from Lund University, and he did very nice work showing the blood-brain barrier membrane alterations with the RF exposure. Could you could you talk a bit about his results and what are the importance of that?
Again, it's a very, very important comment. And to begin with, one should be honest and say Salford and his collaborators, they were actually group number 16 in the world to show that radiofrequency fields can make the blood-brain barrier leak. And what they showed was that as short as 1 minute phone call would produce this leakage, and at an exposure level that were 5,000 times below the public recommendation in Sweden and in Brazil and elsewhere, you know. And I would also put that among the top questions because the blood-brain barrier, that's one barrier in the body, but there are other similar barriers. For instance, the blood-testis barrier, and as you know, there are some very alarming data on sperm cell quality reductions after cell phone radiation. You have the blood placenta barrier protecting a fetus that from the beginning you need a microscope to see. And with all the problems in society, dramatic decrease in sperm cell quality, that is shown in Europe, in the United States, and so on. Problems to conceive, to get new babies, fertility issues in animals, etc., etc. Again, we should investigate the blood-brain barrier and all the other barriers, because while we talk, maybe they are leaking, and not only in humans, but in every type of animal. And as you probably know, there are similar barriers even in plants. So even plants could be leaking right while we talk. And I mean, all of us are capable of doing these kind of experiments. And I hope you have a much better situation in Brazil and in the whole of South America. But at least here in Europe and in Sweden, if you mention these questions, it's kind of out through the door. No one wants to talk about them. No one wants to listen. And for instance, right now in Sweden, we have a very big, I mean, Sweden is small compared to Brazil, of course, but for Swedish standard, we have a big society, and they are now with big billboard ads telling people that we have to protect honeybees. Very nicely, very good. And I called the society, the association, and wanted to talk with their experts on honeybees and the problems with them. And they were completely non-interested. Nothing. They didn't even return the calls. So it feels very strange, sort of holding up big flyers, I mean, like this, you know, saying, hey, look at this and look at that and so on. And people are not paying any attention. You are, but we are too few. We need more people aboard. The mental fire brigade needs more fire soldiers. And as I said before, please make us wrong. And as I've always told people, if the microwave radiation, the exposures from telecom, wireless telecom system is safe, then doctors and professors like ourselves, we will prove it. because in science, as you know, all roads lead to Rome, meaning that if it's safe, we will demonstrate it to be safe. But we are not allowed even to do that. So what should we do then, really? It's a very important science politics and science philosophy issue. And the years are passing by. We listen and hear about problems, but we are not allowed to attack them.
And we can add another important subject is the children. When you talk about the membrane and the children, all their tissues are more susceptible to the EMF exposure. And the problem is that the children are using a lot of these mobile devices, and sometimes very close to their body and their head, and sometimes for a long time each day.
I agree. And I mean, maybe I wouldn't say they are more sensitive. It could be the other way around. They are less sensitive because their general repair capacity is far better, at least compared to mine, you know, since I'm old. But if I would die right now, you would be surprised, of course, but it wouldn't mean anything. But if we impact the children and even babies and fetuses in a negative way, then we could end up having a situation with no human beings left. So the impact at that generational level is far, far more important. As I say, if a few old men and women die somewhat earlier than it was meant to, not a big deal. But children, they need to be protected. And I'm always sort of surprised. And if you allow me to tell you a short story, in March 2020, I went with a commuter train here in Stockholm. And since no one knows who I am, you know, I always take the possibility to educate and inform people. And next to me in the commuter train was a very posh lady in her 60s maybe. And I leaned forward and said, because she was working with her smartphone, and I said, hey, do you know that the World Health Organization in Geneva in Switzerland, they have cancer classified the radiation that comes from your smartphone? She went ballistic, as the English say, you know. She was so angry with me and said that I should shut up, and I didn't know what I was talking about, and I could basically go to a warm place. And I said, no, please, stop. You have this smartphone, and on it you have Google. Couldn't you please just Google WHO, brain tumor, and cell phone? And she did. And she went silent for like 2 minutes. And then slowly she looked up at me and said, I'm very sorry. It's all here. You are completely right. I'm very, very sorry. And now I get angry again, she said, but not at you, but at our government, parliament, and health authorities. Why have they not informed me? You see, I'm not only a mother, I'm also a grandmother. And a week ago, I gave my granddaughter, she's 12 years of age, a new smartphone. And now, as a grandmother, I regret it. So education and information is very much needed as well. Not only more scientific realizations, but also to use the information we have and allow independent scientists to stand up and investigate. And as I've said many times during this interview, I would be so happy to be able to tell this grandmother in the future that no, the WHO and we were wrong. There wasn't any risk. It's completely safe. I would be so very, very glad. But I often from parents get the question, you know, this tablet, this laptop, this cell phone, this Wi-Fi router, is it safe for my child? And I have to be honest and not lie and say, no, it is not safe. That's the current realization from science.
Can we make a question here from the people that watching?
Of course, yeah. Will I see it somewhere or?
Yeah, I put in the screen.
Okay.
First, what's the effect of cell phone tower radiation on collagen production cells? What does the skin become dry and age? I think we talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I don't know. That's one area we would love to investigate. And I used to work with one of the premier experts on collagen and collagen producing cells. So we were in a pole position to really do some good science, but our ways parted. And it's interesting because when you look on people, some get, as the person here writes, a dry and aged skin. Others are at the other end of the spectrum, and they get more moist and sort of fatty-looking skin and warm and nice to touch, you know, and it looks young and vibrant. So something is going on with the skin, and maybe we have genetic factors that will propel people in different directions due to the exposure, or there are other confounders which we need to find out about. So I'm sorry, I need to leave the questions with, I don't know.
Dr. Johansson, could I ask you something that's related to that question? Because usually when people that are sensitive to electromagnetic fields, they tend to have colder hands and feet. Is that true for everybody, or how does that work?
No, again, when I of course I haven't investigated everyone, but I have met quite a number of electrohypersensitive persons, and they have the whole range from cold feet and hands to the other end of the spectrum with very warm hands and feet. So again, something is obviously going on, but if it is a primary issue or not, I don't know, but we have tried to get it investigated, but we failed to get the necessary support, you know.
Here another question of Rafael. What's the technical, biological cause roots of this EMF-related disease?
I love the question. You know, I could spend weeks on talking about that, but I should make it very short. From a mechanistic point of view, maybe the colossal exposure levels of energy is like throwing gasoline on a fire. It will really burn very high. And very few people realize that the public exposure recommendations here in Sweden or in Brazil or elsewhere, they are compared to natural background in the order of a quintillion times higher than the natural background or much more. Even for a scientist, it's hard to imagine an increase that spells out a 1 with 18 zeros times the natural background. Just imagine, for instance, if the outdoor temperature would increase overnight a quintillion times, then not only Stockholm would burn down, but the entire planet would disappear in a flame, you know. So these astronomical or biblical or colossal increases might be the mechanistic background to why you initiate all these issues. And for me, it's more a sense that we need to understand, and there are very good scientists on this, you know, that has come forward, like Dimitris Panagopoulos in Greece and Paul Dayan, which I collaborated with as well, and so on. Different pieces of the mechanistic puzzle. But again, today we don't have the whole picture clear for us. And it needs to be investigated, of course, again, with the positive note that you would then also understand what is it in the exposure situation. Is it the frequency, the modulation, the pulsation, the polarization? What is it that is causing the negative effects? And if we know it, can we in any way change the technologies, making them truly safe? And of course, the country, and I hope Sweden will do this, the country that comes up with what I've called tomorrow's green, human, and environmental friendly technology in the telecom sector will be richer than Japan ever was per capita. So it's a very, very sunny side to this if people dare to start investigating and producing new products. And as you probably know, like in Japan, you can already buy cars which have a switch on the panel where you switch off the indoor Wi-Fi. In Poland, there will soon be a launch of a low SAR cell phone. In Sweden, there is a company producing radiation-reducing cases for cell phones, for tablets, for Wi-Fi routers, and so on. So there are products on the market that tries to remedy these issues. And I forgot, and I'm sorry for that, Alvaro. You mentioned the phone gate and the phone gate results, and I'm very, very proud to tell you that I'm also on the phone gate alert team, and from that particular investigations, it has turned clear that tomorrow's cell phones will have to be reduced in outwards energy exposure. And then the question is, the current SAR level, is that usable? I don't think so at all. And you also mentioned it. We must look at non-thermal and long-term effects. And then the SAR will not help us at all. And we have written together with Dimitris Panagopoulos and George Carl a paper particular about this. So the word is out, and it's up to the industry to catch on and come up with new solutions. So maybe again, if you call me in not 50 years time, maybe 1 year time or 2 years time, we will have new products on the market, taking shares and making the shareholders very happy, of course, for that particular company or that particular country.
Yeah, that's related to what I was talking before about when it comes to the money, because when the company have to pay a compensation, I believe this will happen in a couple of years. It's my feeling. And okay. in the same case of you have different brands of cell phones, one with high SAR, another one is low SAR, and the consumer starts to become smarter. And why I will buy this one that's a higher SAR? So it's like organic food and a lot of stuff works like this. So I think when it comes to the money, the things will start to change.
I agree, and I hope you're right as well, because that will also shift the enormous economic burden from the state level back to the industry, where I think it should be. And you might remember that, what is his name? I will quickly check it here. 1 second, please. Richard Blumenthal, the American senator, who in 2019, February the 7th, he asked the FCC, the Federal Communication Commission, and the Food and Drug Administration, and also the manufacturers and operators of telecom technique, about papers and investigations that had been scientifically showing safety of 5G. And all of these different bodies, they looked like very surprised, and they had to admit that no, they were not aware of any such studies. And Richard Blumenthal, the American senator, said that it is like flying blindfolded. And I agree. I mean, we need to come back to a situation of an adult society where people take adult responsibility, and that includes everyone. No one should be able to just bail out, that we have seen like now, but everyone has to be aware of potential risks. And if we cannot prove such a gadget safe, then we shouldn't allow, and as Alvaro said, particularly not children and teenagers, to even use it or be exposed to it. And after all, and this might sound silly in a way, but we are talking about toys. All these gadgets are not life necessities. Life necessities are clean air you can breathe without risk, water you can drink without risk, food you can eat without risk, compassion, love, understanding, support. Those kind of entities, they are the life necessities, not
exactly
if you have a smartphone or not, you know.
Exactly. There's not essential. It's not essential in.
No, not at all, you know.
We have another question here from
Yeah.
Professor Álvaro. How long do you believe the WHO will take to consider seriously the results of the scientific research showing adverse health effects from low-level and long-term EMF exposure instead of consider only the thermal effects of short EMF exposure?
Oh, I love the question, you know, but I have written exactly about this to the WHO and to their heads, the United Nations. And they don't seem interested at all to discuss this. But hopefully tomorrow when I wake up, I will see a headline saying that now the WHO has decided to consult experts in the field regarding long-term non-thermal effects and put new guidelines. And maybe even going one step further, I have actually proposed not to have recommendations, not guidelines, but have so-called hygienic safety levels, which are driven by law. And I said already 1983 and following year after year, and especially in 1997, I came forward and proposed such a hygienic safety level, namely to go back to the natural background, because then we can say for sure this is safe for your children, for your baby, for your fetus, for your teenager, as well as for yourself and your elderly.
Professor Johansson, what do you think if the IARC or WHO raise the classification from 2B to 2A, let's say to 2A? Do you think this will make some difference in practical ways?
I don't think they will raise it. No.
You think we will stay at 2B?
I think actually the risk is that they will go in the other direction, down to 3 instead. So we will see. I know they are working on new classifications, but as far as I heard the rumors, they will definitely not go into 2A, but rather in the other direction. And as I said before, that doesn't make any real difference, because again, this cancer card is very, very weak, maybe even non-existent in a sense. So if we should ask the WHO to act, then it would be on the other issues, toxicity, impact on fertility, leakage of blood-brain barrier, impact on the immune system, impact on bacteria, on plants, blah, 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 all of that, There we have very much further data, and also the effects of the radiation is much better understood.
Dr. Johansson, could I ask another question also related to this? Because you said there are several studies showing there's impact with bacteria, right? The EMF impact the bacteria and make them more virulent, I could say.
Yeah, I mean, they become antibiotic resistant.
Yes, antibiotic.
So you cannot treat the patients any longer, and they will die from silly things like a splinter in your thumb.
Yes, I would like to know if there are any studies related to virus. Do they impact on the virus?
Yeah, very good comment and question. I have looked at the scientific literature. There are single studies indicating that there could be a relationship, but they need to be replicated and further expanded before we can say really anything. But again, to feed the planet with excess amounts of wireless energy should maybe impact even such small particles as bacteria, especially when we move towards terahertz and other ranges of frequency distributions. So there is an open possibility. And again, I'm like Richard Blumenthal, the American senator. I want to ask the manufacturers, the communication commissions, the Food and Drug Administrations all over the world, are you really sure you know what you're doing? And when I ask people this, they always look very, very strange and look away. And it's like an answer in itself. No, they don't know what they're doing. Of course not. And that's the risky part, that we as humans, we could pull out the rug under all living creatures on the planet. I mean, I could live with, or die with rather, that we kill ourselves, but not if we start killing everything else as well.
Professor Johansson, a couple minutes ago, you talked about in terms of not significant impact statistically on mortality of brain cancer, because it's 3 or 5 people in 100,000, and the decision makers will say, oh, it's too few people, we cannot stop our communication, our economic progress, and etc., etc. But I believe in these terms of stopping, of course, we cannot stop the communication systems. But what do you think about more restrictive levels like Austria, Salzburg has of 1,000 microwatts per square meters? Let's say if we have 1,000 microwatt per square meter for the whole world. Let's say if ICNIPS sets in a utopic dream, because today is 4,500,000 microwatts per square meter, if I'm not wrong. But let's say if the levels is decreased for 1,000 microwatts per square meter for the whole world, do you think it's not about stop communication, but to have more responsible levels and more secure, safe levels?
Well, to begin with, that's a misunderstanding. Austria and Salzburg has exactly the same recommendation as the rest of the ICNIP world, which is 9 million microwatts per square meter. So there is no difference. It was many years ago a suggestion from a single medical doctor that it should be reduced, but it was never accepted or introduced into Salzburg or Austria. So the exposure levels are always the same. There is no difference between different countries. And the reason is that when you, for instance, travel from Brazil to Austria, Salzburg, Stockholm, Sweden, or wherever you want to travel, you expect your cell phone, your wireless tablet, your wireless laptop, and so on to work. And it will, of course. But the question in itself is very interesting. And I would say that we need to err on the right side. And one way to do it, and which would be another sector, another industrial sector, very, very happy, especially the Swedish company ABB, that is to change from wireless back to, or not back to introduce, for instance, fiber optics, which are much safer, faster, higher capacity, and take all the wireless and make it wired and shielded, bringing the exposure levels down dramatically. Maybe not all the way down to the previous natural levels, but more or less. And then Sweden would applaud, because ABB has a cable factory here in Sweden, and then we can cover the world with fiber optics. And also the consumers wouldn't see any difference. It would still be the same programs in their smartphone. They would still have the same pornography. They would still have the same news, videos, films, movies, whatever. But in a shielded wired concept, meaning that they cannot run around as much with their cell phone. But honestly, here in Sweden, I've never heard anyone say that it was the running around, the mobility, that made the affair or the video or whatever better. So the mobility doesn't impress, and it could be just sort of forbidden in the sense that everything would go wide instead.
I have 2 comments or 2 questions. You said that in the whole world is the same limit. We don't have like I heard that Salzburg has different, but also Italy and Brussels and Slovenia, Russia, India, China, they have lower levels than Ekener.
No. They are the same, because otherwise all the businessmen would complain, you know. So the exposure levels, they are the same. And there could be like a 10 potential in the recommendation. But as you know, a cell phone, a smartphone, works very much below the maximal recommendation. So that has no practical implication at all. And also, you know, the uniformity around the world will go towards everyone having the same public exposure recommendations. And all the manufacturers, they cannot make a special phone for Italy and a special phone for Austria and so on. No way. And as I said, I called and talked to people in Austria and asked them about this proposed level, and they said exactly what I tell you. No, it's the same as elsewhere. And that's a good suggestion whenever you read. For instance, I read about Brussels, I read about Switzerland and so on. Just phone someone you know that and ask them. And then you will find out what the reality actually is. And it is the same, maybe at some place a 10 potential, but it doesn't matter. So it's very much the same. And the question is not to have the exposure levels up there, but to bring them down to a safe level. And today, if you, based upon the research that is published, if you would reduce the public exposure, then you need to reduce it 50 million times. Then you can claim that from science, this is safe.
Yes. And the second is the question of Aline. How can we have a wireless world free of harm? Because you said some suggestion of using more fiber optics and wired connection. But I believe it's kind of impossible to people to don't use mobile, to lose the mobility, you know? The idea of mobility is too strong in our society, to have mobility with communication with mobility. So of course, in your house, in your work, you can wire your devices, your smart TV, your laptop, your computer. But what about your cell phone, your tablet? I think it will be very hard to people to don't want anymore the mobility. So how can we have a wireless?
Yeah, only if you say so. If you instead say that now we will have a new world with a new system, and you know, I wrote down the topic's name, setting the standard for a wireless world free of harm. And I realized immediately, no, that's not possible. With the science today, you cannot be wireless. You have to turn wired, shielded wired, and fiber optics can be one of those solutions. And also, as I said, from a practical point of view, you will have a much higher capacity, a much higher safety when it comes to integrity issues and hacking issues and so on. And the speed will also increase dramatically. So the consumer will have a lot of good sides to it. And sometimes, you know, in an adult society, we cannot allow the consumers to decide for us. Sometimes we have to trust what scientists bring up on the table and realize that, no, we cannot continue having the society as it is. And if someone then loses his or her mobility, so be it. And, you know, you need to just come forward and set an example. I often find myself in very odd situations. You know, I'm very often invited to action groups, campaigners, activists who want me to talk about the science. And they are very much against 5G, 4G, 3G, cell phones, wireless society, and so on. But still, all of them have a cell phone by which they film me. That doesn't make sense. And I often tell them that their credibility went out through the door. Either you protest and then you cannot use it, or then you don't protest and then you can do whatever you want to. So it's a very odd situation. And also, if you are a protester against the wireless society, of course, you can never, I repeat, never, ever call a cell phone number. But people do that. I cannot understand it, you know. You have to be setting an example. And it's not difficult, it's not hard. I mean, I have personally never owned a cell phone. It has nothing to do with what we are talking about today. But with cell phones being introduced in Sweden, and that was in the early 1980s, I saw that cell phones, they were very big and heavy. And as you can see, I don't have any muscles, so I couldn't carry these big machines around. They were very expensive. And as you can see, I don't have that kind of money to buy so very expensive tools. But above all, I realized that only very important people use them. And at that time, in the beginning of the 80s, as today, 2021, I carry no importance. I don't need such a tool. I can understand that maybe Vladimir Putin and Joe Biden might have use for them, but I don't see them using such gadgets really. So maybe they communicate in some other way. So, I mean, if you want to change the world, then you should step up and start changing it. But if you say, no, it cannot be done, then you cannot change it.
Yes, I agree with you that we need to be more coherent with what we are protesting, or if we are activists. But let's say,
interrupt. You know, I'm kind of Asperger's syndrome, you know, and I'm very, very sort of careful with words. I wouldn't say more. Either you are or not.
Yes.
It's like people say, oh, I want to have a safer world. No, I want to have a safe world. In Sweden, we never compare in that way, you know. So the word safer, we don't understand. Either it is safe or not. There is nothing in between. And I think particularly when I meet innocent creatures, like fetuses, babies, children, teenagers, animals, plants, bacteria, and so on, then you have to decide, is it possible to produce a safe world or not?
Yes. even if we don't own a cell phone ourselves, but maybe we are close to a cell phone antenna, and other people will use. So I can use my wired computer, I can have wired and shielded everything, but probably other people will want to have a good signal of the tower. And if you don't live very far away from a tower, you are being affected at the same way. So
yeah, but again, you can only live your own life. So you should set the example from your point of view. And if this starts to spread, then more and more people will start pondering, reflecting, and thinking. And as I said before, it's very important to have this kind of programs that you are producing right now to share information and to educate people and allow them to think for themselves. People are very smart, very intelligent, and they can see downsides and upsides of everything. But sometimes maybe also society needs to put down the foot. And as you say, there could be exposures coming from antennas, base stations, and so on. But what about if the Swedish government and parliament just said that from tomorrow we switch it off and you need to get yourself a wide connection, period? It doesn't take very much to take big steps forward, And as you said very wisely before, the money really rules, and always follow the money, people say. And sometimes you need to put pressure. But how about a new world where concern, support, compassion, and intelligence rules instead of money?
I see your point.
And I can say this because I'm very, very old. So I mean, I will be gone in a few weeks, months, years time, I don't know. But I hope that in the future people will look back and conclude what we already now are concluding, that this wireless world with all its gadgets are actively dumbing people down. They are not making them more intelligent, quite the opposite. And also it's very clear that people become infantile. And these streaks in our society needs to be discussed from the very base and upwards. And we need to ask ourselves, do we want to have babies out on the street being 40, 50, 60 years of age? Or do we want to have responsible adults?
Well, thank you very much. I think
the same to you. Thank you very much.
We need to reflect on this last sentence you said, maybe for other people that will watch this in a couple months or years. And thank you very much, Silvia and Professor Álvaro. Do you want to say your last message, Silvia and Álvaro?
Yes, Dr. Johansson, it was a pleasure to be here with you. As I said before, I admire very much your work. You're a pioneer in the field, and you are a very courageous person. So you are an example for us all. I think that's how the world changes, and that's how the world gets better. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Olle, for your very nice and very important talk this afternoon. I hope you will have many more years to come with us and to help to improve the population health. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I wish the same to all of you, that you will live for 1 billion years so you can see what will happen down the line, So
I also thank you very much, Professor Johansson. We invite people to sign the letter to WHO that we created on change.org/EMF to who. I don't know how to say this in English, but you can see the name in the screen, the website, and it's already translated in 18 languages. And I think you help us in Sweden, and we have many other languages, and we have over 2,400 signatures, but we need more. So it's our effort. So we look forward to have you again to teach us more. We have more things to talk about: the satellites, the Starlink project, the 5G, the pollinators. There are many subjects to go deeper, and your knowledge is very precious. So the world need your knowledge, need your wisdom, need your words. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm very honored by your words, and I would be very glad to come back for further discussion. And as you say, there is so much more, and we haven't even touched upon the behavioral and the physical impacts. I could just quickly mention that I think it was 2 years ago, the Department of Transportation in Sweden came out and warned parents, because the Department of Transportation, they issue driving licenses, and they pointed to that children have become so myopic or nearsighted because they are looking so much at small screens. So they will never, ever be allowed to test for a driving license. And they have said solemnly that as parents, you have to realize that if your kid wants to become, for instance, a taxi driver, just forget about it. That will never happen in Sweden. And that has nothing to do with the radiation or anything like that. It's just a behavioral phenomenon, because the screens are too small and the kids want to sort of creep into them, and they become nearsighted, as very, very strange situation. So we can talk a lot about other things.
Yes, for sure. We have much more subject, and we need a lot of these clear words and wise words. It's so important these days. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.